to lead a flourishing life, you have to have an understanding of the world in which you live, and part of that is understanding the natural world in which you live, and this is quite straightforward. There's no problem that I can see about telling the child this is a rose. But if you say that we all come from God, then this is not in the same category. It's not part of the necessary prerequisites of learning in order to lead a flourishing life. It is just one view on this, and it can, as I say, in principle, lead some people simply to hang on to the religion with which they were born without questioning this. A flourishing life is a very general notion. I mean, it can apply to animals. I think you can talk of cats leading a more flourishing life than other cats, for instance, if they're able to do the sorts of things which cats enjoy doing and thrive on doing, like hunting and sleeping and feeding and that sort of thing. But with regard to human beings, I mean, again, if you take a kind of a hyper-traditional society in which autonomy doesn't come into the picture, you simply do what the mores of your group tell you to do, and the whole idea that you kind of can choose to a large extent how you're going to live your life doesn't I mean, it's just off the radar completely. You can still make some kind of distinction there between a person in say a hyper-traditional society, some tribal society, whatever, who's leading a flourishing life. I mean, perhaps they're a successful father and successful farmer and successful warrior, and they have good health, and their children don't die, and this sort of thing. They're well respected in their community. That sort of person, and then the opposite sort of person, the person who's a failure at everything, terrible relationships, children all die. He goes blind at the age of 25 or something. You can build up a story like that, and it's pretty clear that the distinction, that on the concept of flourishing, you can distinguish between the flourishing and non-flourishing lives without autonomy coming into the picture at all. But in our kind of society, a modern industrial society in which is based on a democratic political system, autonomy is in every pore of that system. I mean, it's something which we cannot conceive as that we could be without. So it's not a universal value, but it is a centrally important value in our kind of society. In a non-religious context, for instance, if you have some peculiar kind of neighbour living next door to you who for whatever reason, becomes very interested in your children. I'm not in a sexual sense, but if they feel that they kind of are being encouraged to kind of have a role in their upbringing for some reason, and they got the wrong idea, the parents don't really want this, then the parents have a right to prevent this person from sticking his oar in. But the right there arises from their responsibility as parents. It's not a self-standing right. So I don't see that parents have any self-standing right. This is certainly how some religious people, well, a lot of religious people might see it, I suppose, that if they are say a Catholic and perhaps they see it as part of their duty as a Catholic. It's not so much a right, it's more to do with duties, responsibilities. Their duty or responsibility as a Catholic to bring up their child in their own faith. Then rights might be based on that. But the question is whether or not they do in fact have this duty. I mean, they have it as a duty of the faith, as it were, but whether or not that's an ethical duty, whether or not they're morally obliged to do it, or ethically obliged to do it, is a further question. I think I would doubt that, actually. I think on the following grounds that what's ethically appropriate here is that the child is brought up to be an autonomous chooser of their own, you know, how they're going to live their lives within obvious constraints, and parents should respect that value of autonomy. A secularist, in the sense of a non-believer who believes in non-believer who believes in autonomy, a non-religious believer who believes in autonomy. I guess historically, again, in terms of shadows and so on and legacies, as you're implying, that does come from, in our case, from Christian roots. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of room for kind of seeing eye to eye, I think, between religious believers and non-religious believers. But what do you do about the intransigent parent? Well, I think at some point you just have to, I say intransigent, the person who doesn't hold this value. I think you just have to dig your heels in and say there are some things which are not negotiable in a civilized society. And this is one of them, that if you think that you for whatever reason, you have the right to steer a child in the direction that you yourself have followed, rather than letting that child work things out for herself, you're just stepping beyond the mark, just as we think you're stepping beyond the mark if you're inflicting cruelty on the child. I don't see why a liberal religious thinker, religious parent, why is there any reason for thinking that they're guilty of child abuse if they're bringing up their child to make their own decisions? But yeah, I mean, with the other kind of case, there are serious problems, I think, of how we should treat other people, and we don't force other people. I mean, outside a religious context, and we don't force other people to do our bidding. We take it as anathema, if I could use that phrase, in a civilized society. And this is what the religious parent is doing, is she's forcing, putting pressure on the child to do their bidding, to be a good ex. And I can't see any justification for that. I mean, say you're a Catholic and you're thinking, well, I'd like to get married, and if the idea of marriage is closely tied to having children, and if part of the consequence of having children is that you're obliged to bring them up in your faith, I mean, then your hand, it's very difficult, I think, for some Catholics, because their hands are tied. If they're going to do the what everyone else does and get hitched up to somebody, then all this follows. I mean, perhaps they should, if they really follow it through, then they perhaps should think twice about getting married.